Syberia is another of those titles that I've always meant to get to, and for whatever reason just didn't at the time. I remember seeing it on the shelves in stores and thinking, hey, that looks cool, I'll have to pick it up sometime, and then just not doing that. It originally came out in January 2002, which was something of a transformative moment in my life. In April of that year, I quit my first job and went backpacking around Canada and a little of the United States for around 5 months. So it certainly stands to reason that new games weren't the most pressing thing on my mind. Though I did manage 2 complete playthroughs of Shadow Hearts on my PlayStation 2 prior to going, and it remains my favourite JRPG even to this day. By the time I returned, Neverwinter Nights had been released, and my D&D group were planning to play some sessions of it online. Though this never actually panned out. Still, I got pretty hard into modding that game, and while I never finished or published anything, I was taking my earliest steps into game development. My point is, I had a lot going on. After you catch the travel bug, it's hard to imagine yourself having a normal life where you work to pay for a house so you can take a vacation 2 weeks out of the year. I had my sights set on returning to the wider world, an ambition that sees me living in Japan even today. So even though an adventure game of this nature seems to be absolutely perfect for me, especially since I was already a fan of the likes of Grim Fandango and The Longest Journey, it just didn't happen at the time. I don't think I gave it a second thought after that until I got them free on GOG some time ago. So once they were in my library, I was absolutely going to get around to them one day, along with all this stuff. This recent playthrough and review are, among other things, in response to comments in my Longest Journey video telling me to give this one a go, and the fact that I'm working on my own narrative adventure game of sorts. Don't think of this as some kind of announcement. It's all just placeholder assets and systems in Unity, and some background art in Blender. But it's a start. I wasn't 100% sure I wanted to cover these for the channel when I took my first tentative steps into Benoit Sokal's mysterious Clockpunk universe. But it was about the time I was in Barakstadt University negotiating with these 3 dorks that I realized just how charming this strange and cozy little game was, and how lost I'd become in the whole thing. So I took the trip all the way through the first 3 games before going back to record them for capture, and got to work making this for all you wonderful people who swing by to watch my aggressively lukewarm takes on everything and anything. So guys, if like I did with this game, you find yourself having a good time, then please leave a like and a comment. I especially love hearing other people's stories about their experiences with the games I'm talking about, and if you're new, why not hit that sub button and help get this channel up to 10k by the end of the year. Also, there's a couple of real money options to help support the channel if you can, but if you can't, don't worry about it at all. This is still just a hobby, and all just for fun. Anyway, with the admin out of the way, and I actually wrote it into the script this time and didn't need to fix it later. Yeah, your boy is organized this time. Next thing you know, I'll even have clean underwear for once. Okay, jokes aside. Why don't we jump aboard an incredible mechanical train, wind the spring up nice and tight, and take a wild tour through one of the coldest and most inhospitable places on the planet, all on the off chance that a wild story about a land of blue grass and the last living mammoths can be found at the end of it all. Sound good? Then all aboard the Voralberg Express. This is Syberia. As mentioned, I played all these games on GOG. I am not an affiliate, and this isn't a sponsored video. I just like what they do, and I like not having any DRM in my games. I don't think I paid more than $10 for a single entry while they were on sale, and I was able to, for the most part, install them smoothly enough. The first Syberia game is surprisingly stable for a game of its age that hasn't had any kind of official HD remaster. I got the game free from GOG during a winter sale, I think. Anyway, after installing it, I didn't apply any mods or patches, didn't need to run the EXE in compatibility mode or anything like that, and I did 2 full playthroughs without a single crash to desktop or bug. If you want to clean up the edges of the 3D characters, there are a couple of guides for getting it running in a kind of quasi-HD mode, but no one has done any kind of upscaling mod for it like the one I found for The Longest Journey back when I played it. Syberia 2, on the other hand, has a few hitches. When I first fired it up, the game was running more or less at warp speed, on account of the frame rate being so high. So I had to look up some guides and edit a .ini file in order to clamp the frame rate to 60 FPS and enable characters to actually finish their sentences. After that, I was also hit with multiple crashes whenever any of the long pre-rendered cutscenes played, and since this game doesn't have an autosave, I often found myself having to repeat fairly large chunks of the game until I got it into my head to save every few minutes. Unfortunately, I never found an actual fix for this. Usually after one crash, just restarting the game and going back to that cutscene meant that it would play without a hitch. If anyone knows of a surefire way to stop this from happening though, let me know in the comments. The only other issue I had is a very minor one, and one only really relevant to people who have multiple monitors set up. For whatever reason, the game doesn't lock your cursor to the game's monitor, and accidentally clicking on the second monitor will cause the game to minimize. This is only a minor inconvenience, as it only briefly breaks your immersion, but tabbing back into the game will sometimes balk your graphics. You can fix this just by walking into a different background though. It would have been much less of a problem if the game didn't hide your cursor during conversations, so I just had to get used to taking my hand off the mouse when people were talking, and being extra careful when clicking on scene transitions on the far left of the screen. Games are a team effort, combining the skills of numerous disciplines. While multi-skilled solo devs aren't all that hard to come across these days, the indie scene as we know it didn't exist back in the late 90s or the early 2000s. Prior to the arrival of 3D games, teams were kept relatively small and budgets relatively low, so keeping everyone on the same page wasn't as hard as it is in modern day AAA studios. This is why we don't have all that many rock stars or auteurs in the world of gaming. I'm sure you know a few: Sam Lake, Hideo Kojima, Swen Vincke, Rafael Colantonio, John Romero, Amy Hennig, Hironobu Sakaguchi, Shinji Mikami, Miyazaki, no, the other Miyazaki. Okay, so actually there's a few of these guys. But what makes them special? Why is it that in an industry that's very much a team effort, comprised of people who very often don't understand each other's jobs, and as such don't realize how the things they do in their job impact the people in other departments, or if you're an arsehole like Marty Stratton, you're well aware of the trouble you're causing and are just a petty little vindictive goblin with an axe to grind for some reason? Sorry, I'm sure I'll delete that line in one of the edits. Probably. So you've got all these different cooks from all these different culinary disciplines, all trying to put their wildly different ingredients into the same pot, and somehow create something mind-blowingly beautiful, entertaining and fun to play, and not really knowing if it's all going to work out until they are too far committed to do anything about it once they realize they're producing a dud. What you need is a visionary. You need someone who can steer the ship and communicate exactly what it is they want from each branch of their game development team, while still allowing them enough creative freedom that they don't feel like they're working in some kind of code factory. Enter Benoit Sokal. While Benoit isn't quite the heavy hitter that some of the other names I've mentioned are, there's no denying that the real magic that sets Syberia apart comes from him. This is very much his world, and these are his characters, and his story, and through his incredible drawings and paintings, he was able to communicate what he wanted to his team, while still taking time to listen to the programmers and technical people to understand what the limitations of the technology were at the time, and work around those to tell the story he wanted with as little compromise as possible. But who was this relatively unknown artist from Belgium who created such a cult classic of the adventure game genre? There isn't a massive amount of information on Benoit floating around on the internet. His Wikipedia entry is fairly short, but it does have quite a few links to both English and French interviews, and there are a few videos dedicated to his memory that I found on YouTube that help shed some light on his career and legacy. I'm not going to do what I usually do and put lots of citations here, but I'll link the individual things down in the description. Same with the videos, I'll throw up a little of them as B-roll, but I think you're all better off just going and looking into these things for yourself. Born in Brussels in 1954, he attended the Institute of St. Luc, where he studied to be an artist, and his early career was in the world of comics. Most notably, in the late 70s and early 80s, he wrote Inspector Canardo. This was something of a subversion of the film noir genre, telling the story of an alcoholic duck detective who solved mysteries in a world of anthropomorphic animals. Suffice to say, this wasn't some kind of kids comic. In one interview, Benoit talked about his experience with the medium of comics growing up. Once upon a time, comics were just for telling children's stories, but as the audience got older, and the kids who grew up reading those comics became the next generation of artists for them, the storytelling matured, and even ideas like the graphic novel, which sounds more mature than comic, started to get thrown around. He talks about this in context of how he also saw video games growing up from becoming much more than a child's toy. Benoit was progressive with his craft. He is apparently one of the first comic artists to use digital coloring to help speed up his process, though he laments having to use a mouse to do this. He also became interested in 3D modeling and animation, and began to get ideas about the kinds of stories or experiences he could create with these new tools. By his own admission though, being a comic artist was a lonely job. He would sit in his basement and spend all day drawing without speaking to anyone, and after 20 years of that, he was looking for a new frontier to explore for himself, one where he could work with other people. This is what led him to pitching a kind of interactive CD-ROM experience to his publisher. A small idea that would be made by a small team, one that blew up into a 4-year project that produced Amazon: The Explorer's Legacy. Since I'm writing this in April of 2025, we are not far out from getting a full remake of this game, and I'm hoping they land it. While the original is still something of a unique and interesting experience, it hasn't aged as well as some games. I will be calling back to this game a little later in the review, but I think it's something I'd rather talk about if I get the remake. Anyway, the game was something of a surprise commercial success, which left the door open for another more ambitious project, which is how we got Syberia. I feel Benoit's abilities as an artist are what really make this game something special. While games from large studios have, at least for the time being, concept artists to help visualize a creative director's ideas, Benoit could show his team exactly what he wanted, completely unfiltered in any way. His work as a comic artist gave him an eye for composition and dramatic shots, which no doubt helped finding those perfect angles for those pre-rendered backgrounds. His artwork also features heavily within much of the game, and adds to the distinctive personality of the world and its tone. As such, these places and stories really feel like the creative vision of one very passionate person, and not some design by committee monstrosity that is completely incoherent, or the blandest flavor of vanilla you could imagine. Having a creative artist as your lead doesn't always work though. The technical side is where you're going to come up against limitations, and making mistakes here is what can lead to days or even weeks of work being scrapped and redone. In the Skyrim and Fallout mod scene, we are always very skeptical of ideas guys with no modding experience or skills of their own, looking for a team of artists and coders to basically boss around, because they have no concept of how much time it will take to implement their ideas, or how much of that work will be wasted in the event the would-be auteur changes their mind about something. There are numerous stories of nightmare game development cycles led by these kinds of people. Fortunately, Benoit was always willing to listen to his programmers. He would explain what he wanted from the game in all its glory, and when they brought him back down to earth of what was possible, he would find a way to compromise and work within those limitations. This kind of communication is critical in game development, and there's no doubt the small team size of Amazon and Syberia alike helped a lot here. I think this is also a big part of the reason we have so many AAA flops coming out of the gate these days. Teams and budgets are too big, publishers are too scared to innovate, and no one is really steering the ship. This leads to games that lack any kind of personality or charm. At best, you might enjoy them once and never touch them again. Meanwhile, a 20-something-year-old point-and-click adventure still has a massive cult following and can even charm the pants off new players today. I was also amused to learn that Benoit considered he had learnt nothing from each game that he could bring to the next. He explained that when you were starting the next game, you could be with a completely new team, working with new technology and new ideas, but also he himself was changing as a person. He was getting older, and his writing and art were also evolving and changing. So he approached each new game as if it were the first one. On the 28th of May, 2021, Benoit Sokal passed away after a battle with a long-term illness. While the man is gone, he has left one hell of a legacy through his work, and no doubt inspired countless others to try and do the same. Now that we're getting into the story, I think we should talk about potential spoilers for anyone here who isn't on a nostalgia trip. Since Syberia 2 picks up right where the first game leaves off, then we absolutely have to talk about the first game's ending here. I've played around with the script and edited it a few times, but this seems to be the only way I can really do it. I'll keep some of the second game's bigger revelations confined to a specific spoiler section towards the end. But just be aware going forward that we are going to be talking about the first game's major plot points in their entirety. I know these games are old, but there are plenty of older gamers like me who may have just let it pass them by for various reasons. Okay, so let's talk about this opening. Benoit didn't waste any time sucking us into his strange clockpunk version of our world. And in the opening cinematic, we see this very strange procession of automatons marching in what can best be described as a mockery of human motion, as they carry what seems to be a coffin into a nearby cemetery. If I didn't know better, I'd think this absolutely unholy procession was warning me that I was about to step into some kind of horror game concerning clockwork nightmares. This bizarre parade is observed by a solitary figure standing in the rain, a woman whose suitcase indicates she has travelled far to get here. We follow her as she approaches her hotel, where she is greeted by another automaton crudely pantomiming human movement, before she finally steps inside out of the rain. In this moment, we are thrust into the shoes of Catherine, Kate Walker, a New York lawyer who has travelled to the small village of Valladolid in the Alps to oversee the transfer of the once famous Voralberg automaton factory from its last living heirs to the American-based Universal Toy Company. After meeting a couple of the locals of this very sleepy town, Kate Walker has the first monkey wrench thrown into her plans when it's explained that the funeral procession she saw while she was coming into town was actually for Anna Voralberg, the person Kate is here to meet, who, unfortunately, passed away not long before her arrival. After having this dropped on her, she is escorted to her room where a phone call to her boss puts into sharp perspective what exactly she's expected to do here. This isn't some free holiday in France. This is a simple contract signing. Kate Walker is expected to be in and out in just over a day with the deal done and dusted, and her boss is eager to remind her that this is important.
Listen to me, Kate. Universal Toys is one of our biggest clients, and I don't care how weird that town is. All that matters is that you do not set foot back in New York before you've tied up the deal. Get the picture.
When Miss Walker lays the bad news on her boss though, he explains that this has already been planned for on account of Anna's seniority, and it should be a simple matter of speaking to her notary who can sign over the factory on the family's behalf. So with the rain cleared up, our heroine takes her first steps out into the sleepy little mountain village and has to wrestle with another of the odd little clockwork contraptions that inhabits this place. This sees her coming face to face with the town's aging and somewhat infirm legal representative, who is about to drop the mother of all bombshells on Miss Walker's plans to get this contract signed and rush off back to her superficial world of lattes and fashion sales. You see, Anna Voralberg has been keeping something of a dark family secret for a long time. As the notary explains, and is further backed up by a document he presents to her, Anna had a little brother named Hans, who died in an accident when he was younger. At least, that's what Anna's father wanted everyone to think. We'll unpack Voralberg Sr. later, but it seems his son didn't die, but actually ran away from home when he was around 18. Rather than tell people the truth of this, an elaborate hoax was staged, complete with a closed casket funeral to declare Hans dead and expunged from the family. Anna was not only fully aware of this, she was in fact in semi-regular contact with Hans via an elaborate music box that he constructed for them to send recorded messages to each other. You see, Hans is not only alive and well, he's also something of a genius, and many of the automaton designs that made the factory and the Voralberg family so successful were his. According to Anna's letter, it would seem that Hans is still alive, and as of their last communication, somewhere in Syberia. The notary apologizes for the inconvenience and suggests Miss Walker explore Anna's office in the factory to see if she can find any more information there. And well, that's when things start to get weird. even more weird than this. On the grounds of the factory and estate, we can uncover several interesting things that shed light on the situation. One is an incredibly long diary written by Anna that explains that when they were children, Hans had a near fatal fall, while the two of them were exploring a cave cut into the mountains near the town. They had found cave paintings of mammoths, and Hans had spotted what seemed to be some kind of ancient carving or figurine of one, and tried to climb to reach it. After spending many days in a coma, Hans awoke a much quieter young man, and it was soon discovered that his physical and mental growth would be forever stunted as a result of what happened. Suffice to say, his father wasn't all that happy to discover this. Now, the short version of this, because believe me, there is a lot, is that Hans developed two interesting traits out of his experience. One was a knack for mechanical clockwork things. While he was never able to grasp reading and writing and had limited communication prowess overall, his ability to turn metal cogs into seemingly living things was beyond genius, as we'll soon discover. He also had a fixation with mammoths and especially enjoyed creating clockwork ones. This actually became one of the many sore points between him and his father. Voralberg Sr. wanted Hans putting his talents to things for the factory rather than seeming flights of fancy and imagination. This led to some absolutely abusive behaviour and ended with Hans fleeing his home, the country, and rushing off to anywhere he could learn more about his favourite historical animals. Further exploring the area, we find a magnificent clockwork locomotive stationed on a platform near the factory, and when we actually enter the factory, we are in for one hell of a surprise. This is Oscar. And look, I understand that these clockwork automatons, while probably rare in modern day New York, are still something of a known quantity to Kate Walker, as this factory and its products were world famous once upon a time, but staring down and talking to what is clearly some kind of near perfect AI, or possibly actually conscious machine, that's made entirely from cogs and springs, and not absolutely losing your shit, is one hell of an achievement. Okay, I'm not going to pull this game up on realism too much because 1, we'll be here all day, and 2, where the hell would be the fun in that? The childlike wonder of this story is a big part of its appeal. So, yes, this is our soon-to-be best friend, train engineer, conductor, and all-around stickler for the rules. Through our conversation with Oscar and our exploration of Anna's office, we come to realise that this train is bound for wherever Hans is. And it's at this moment that something stirs inside Kate Walker. Yes, on one hand, she still has an arsehole boss to keep happy, and is working a fairly high pressure contract. But the call to adventure has been sounded. Kate Walker could have cried uncle and ran back to New York at this point. But something wakes up right about here.
I have decided to come along for the ride, Oscar. Ready when you are.
So that's our setup. After jumping through a lot, and I mean a lot of hoops, Kate Walker is able to convince Oscar to let her ride the train all the way to wherever it's going. And along the way, she's going to be faced with all kinds of challenges that she never imagined she'd have to deal with, seeing a world she never even knew existed, and coming to realise that just because you have the kind of life that everyone tells you you should want, a sensible job with good money, and big future prospects, a safe boyfriend who'll be fine until you can no longer overlook what an arsehole he is, friends who want to talk about shopping and sales, and all of the other stuff society tells us is important, it doesn't mean for a second you are actually happy or being true to yourself. So what is Syberia really about? Well, it's about exploring a strange and interesting variation of our world. It's about solving puzzles and overcoming challenges to progress the story. It's about travelling through a part of the world that has been forgotten and helping the people there who are also at risk of being forgotten forever. It's about an old man's madcap dream to find the last surviving mammoths on a small forgotten island somewhere, but more importantly, Syberia is about self-discovery and self-actualization. It's about realising that the world is far bigger and more interesting than you could possibly have imagined, and in doing so, wondering if you could ever return to the tiny slice of reality you once thought embodied everything. Syberia is about Kate Walker. So, who is our heroine? Well, as mentioned in the setup, she's a lawyer from New York working for the Marsan and Lamont law practice. She's a city girl who's got a long-term boyfriend named Dan, who seems to exist in similar work and social circles to her. She's interested in shopping and lattes, and keeps in touch with her mother, who seems like a wonderful person, if a little self-absorbed. And yet, something deep inside absolutely yearns for more. Something is aware that she is being stifled by her career and miserable in her relationship. She is trapped by societal pressure and absolutely begging for something to come along and just push her over the edge into a world of adventure and discovery. Some rational part of Kate Walker may tell herself that at the start, she's chasing hens across the biggest country in the world so she can do her job and make her boss happy. But the truth is, she's been waiting for the call to adventure her whole life. And as someone who around 10 years ago packed up his whole life into one backpack and moved to the opposite side of the world from where he was born, I can relate to that very well. Like most well-made game characters, we learn a lot about her just through her actions. Sure, we the player are just solving puzzles because we're playing the game, but Kate is staring down very real problems that are causing her very real distress, and yet she hardly ever seems to complain or get angry, though she sometimes gets a little frustrated with Oscar.
You can be a real stickler for the rules, Oscar, my old fellow.
Still, it's the little phone calls back to New York that really tell us the most about Kate Walker. If not where she's going, then at the very least where she's from. Her boss, Mr. Marston, is something of an arsehole, for example. I wouldn't last 10 minutes working for this guy before speaking very frankly about his attitude towards his workers and vacating the premises. I understand that being a lawyer is something of a high-pressure job, and signing a contract, while seemingly mundane on the surface, concerns a lot of money changing hands. But at no point anywhere, in any work contract, do you sell your self-respect to a company. No one is allowed to treat you like you are less than human for any reason. Okay, if an employee isn't performing to a satisfactory standard, there are procedures that should be followed that can include termination of the employment. But that doesn't include shouting down your phone at them, derision, and generally being a condescending bully.
What do you think you're doing, Kate? I wanted updates. I wanted results.
Marsden honestly comes across as a little baby having a tantrum. And okay, how could he possibly imagine that Kate has been whisked across Eastern Europe on a whimsical clockwork train to find the person she needs to sign this contract? But for someone sitting in an office on the other side of the world with almost zero information on the situation, he sure has some strong opinions on how easy all of this is supposed to be.
No buts, Walker. You're looking for a senile old creek and you're making heavy weather of it.
Okay, he's a businessman, and he has a right to protect his business interests. But I've never understood at what point a manager or boss starts looking at their subordinates and stops seeing complex human beings worthy of respect and empathy. But he isn't the biggest crybaby of the bunch, because we've got to talk about Kate Walker's love life, and what a train wreck that is.
Hello?
Kate?
Dan, I'm so pleased to hear your voice.
Dan is what we might call a throwaway boyfriend. At the start of the game, we are meant to get the impression that Kate Walker has a lot of ties back to her life in New York, and cutting these loose is going to form a big part of her character development. She has her job, her mother, friends, and a relationship that seems to be going places. We don't know a lot about Dan, but we get the impression that he has a similar career to Kate. That's great, right? They are on equal footing financially. He's got his shit together with his career, and they seem to want similar things out of life. He seems wonderfully safe. He's exactly the kind of guy Kate should marry if she's looking to be divorced before she's 40 with a child. There's a big difference between love and codependency, and just because someone seems like a good match doesn't mean there's anything real there. Especially when he's a gaslighting arsehole.
It doesn't matter, honey. Promise me that you will never put me in that state again. You're usually so delightful.
Dan clearly wants Kate Walker to operate her life around his schedule. Now, okay, in his defense, everyone thought this trip to Europe was at best a 2-day trip to sign some papers and rush off back to the office. But the moment things go upside down, he shows absolutely no concern or compassion for her situation, and instead starts complaining about how all this is going to inconvenience him. So, just listen to this.
Everything going as planned?
Yeah, well, not really. It's not exactly what I thought it would be. Everything's so different here.
Actually, while we're on the subject, I managed to free myself up tomorrow lunchtime. I'll come and meet you at the airport. I hope the flight from Paris won't be delayed. We're expected at the Goldbergs about 8 o'clock. I hope you have the time to take a shower and change, my poor honey bun.
Dan, I don't think the Goldbergs tomorrow night is really on.
Don't worry, Kate. You'll be as perfect as ever. Anyway, you never have to wear much to look really great.
Dan, I'm going to have to extend my stay here. There's 1 or 2 complications. You understand?
Kate, honey, what are you talking about? It's only a measly toy factory.
The sale isn't going through as expected. I've got to stay a bit longer. Dan, you don't mind, do you?
But Katie, you can't do this to me. It's the Goldberg contract. There's millions of dollars on the line here.
Notice how he's really not listening to her. Notice how quickly he wants to get onto the subject of what he wants to do, and then he acts like it's her fault she can't come rushing back to New York to sit on his arm to talk to the Goldbergs or whatever that is. You got a real gem there, honey. An absolute keeper. Dan goes on to display such traits from the Andrew Tate Book of Masculinity as sulking.
Dan, I was going to call you.
Yeah.
Telling his girl to keep her head down and not stand out.
I don't know why you accepted it in the first place. If you just stuck to the middle of the road, then we wouldn't be in this mess.
Backhanded non-apologies.
Yeah, sure. Getting carried away never solves anything, does it? I must say I felt really dumb when I hung up.
Really?
Yeah, I left the door to my office open and I was convinced everybody around heard me.
Oh. I'm so embarrassed, Dan. Please say I'm sorry to your colleagues from me.
Along with a lot of whining about when is she coming home.
So when are you coming home? Are you coming home soon? So, are you coming back soon? But don't you think it's time that you came home? Hurry home, huh?
Meanwhile, Kate is exploring parts of the world she never imagined could exist, and having her horizons blown the hell open. But there's one more player in this drama.
Kate? Is that you?
Well, yeah, who did you think it was?
I didn't recognize your voice, that's all. Must be the distance or something. So, spill the beans. What's Europe like?
Olivia works with Kate at the law firm, and she on the surface seems like a nice, superficial New York girl who matches well with Kate Walker's superficial New York persona. She likes office gossip, shopping, more gossiping, and seems quite eager to stick her nose into her friend's affairs when she sees the boat rocking between her and her boyfriend.
I'm not talking about that. I want to know what's going on with Dan.
What do you mean?
I bumped into him at Maggie's do and he said you'd argued.
I don't hate this girl. Well, I didn't at the start anyway. But she feels like what Kate Walker could have become had she let the spark of adventure die in her. I try not to be too judgmental. We are all products of the lives we lead, and even in the information age, it's not always easy to become aware of a bigger, wider world beyond the confines of that which is directly in front of us. We can see these amazing places all around the world and hear about all these different cultures or become interested in learning other languages and then tell ourselves it's something we'll take care of later. A later that usually never comes. We all have needs. We need to get jobs, pay rent, plan for our futures, and so on. So it's completely understandable that our worldview can become very narrow. I once worked with a guy who'd spent a good stint of time in Tokyo, a place I'm considering moving to myself, and I asked him about his experience there. He summed it up as, you live in one of the biggest and most exciting cities in the world, and exist between 3 train stations, that being your home, your job, and your local bar. So it's not some inexcusable waste of human life to turn out this way. But I certainly wouldn't be coming back for a second date if I matched with this girl on Tinder, that's for sure. Olivia basically uses Kate's absence and her fights with Dan to snipe the guy. What a friend, right? She talks like it's just something that happened, that they were asteroids that just fell into the same orbit and spun closer and closer until the inevitable happened. But no, absolutely not. She wanted this to happen, and so did he. Let's be real here. And she went after it. What turned me against her the most at the end though is how she goes about confessing to Kate. You might think, wow, she's so brave and honest. But this too was a completely selfish act.
Oh, Kate.
She couldn't handle her guilt, and the only way she can feel better about it in the long run is if Kate is mad at her. She isn't confessing because she's truly sorry, she's doing it because she wants to feel better about herself. Oh, I did something bad, but now I'm doing the right thing and owning up to it, so I can look myself in the mirror again now, right? Absolutely despicable behaviour.
Kate, what happened to you, my poor munchkin? I've been trying to contact you for hours.
I have no problems with Kate's mother, though. She seems like a wonderful person, and I hope things work out for her and her single boyfriend. Still, all of these characters are constantly telling Kate that something is changing, and she seems different than before.
Why did you say that I've changed?
I don't know, just an impression. You sound more sure of yourself, like stronger, more confident.
Something Kate is kinda seeing, but nowhere near as much as the others. Just like Walter White's monster in Breaking Bad, the adventurer inside Kate Walker has always been there, always waiting for its moment to shine, and it just took the right set of circumstances for her to step out of the shadows and show the world what she's really made of. I sort of miss these little phone calls in the second game. Marsden and Kate's mother try to get in touch periodically, and her law firm actually sends a private detective to track her down, which we'll talk about as we get into the second game a little deeper. But for the most part, Kate Walker is happy to tell people that things have changed and she's not coming home. And just like any great hero, even if she did, she wouldn't be the same person, and it's unlikely that the person she becomes through this adventure would be even remotely satisfied with the life she used to have. From Valladolid, we are rushed off to Barokstadt University, a place where we'll learn a great deal about mammoths and have to overcome a few challenges. You see, we are now actually taking some version of the journey Hans Voralberg took himself after escaping his father and his home. This becomes apparent by just how many of his wondrous clockwork creations we keep stumbling into along the way. It would seem that Hans has been planning this journey for a very long time, and even left several winding keys for his train positioned at stations along the way. At the university, we discover that Hans, while not an actual enrolled student, spent a lot of time here learning about mammoths and ancient hunter-gatherer cultures. Due to a slight miscalculation, we actually pull up just short of the key and need to jump through quite a few hoops, learn about birds and plants from the Amazon, told you we'd be back here eventually, and deal with these three gentlemen who between them seem to share a perfect memory of every student who ever attended their university. I think I met my university dean once for graduation, and he looked about as bored as I felt at the time. We also attend a lecture to learn about the Ukol people, who now inhabit the northernmost parts of Syberia. Historically, in this story, they are believed to have been the only ancient hunter-gatherer tribe to have domesticated the mammoth and had something of a symbiotic relationship with them. According to this tribe's legends, they actually created a ship, an ark of sorts, to carry a small group of mammoths to an island far north of Syberia, where they supposedly still exist today. At least that's the short version of it. But it's here we start to get a vague hint of what Hans Voralberg might be looking for. Beyond Barokstadt, we visit Komkoldsgard, an abandoned mine that was once staffed almost entirely by Hans's automatons, and has plenty of other evidence of his passing to find too. And then we go to Arlbad, the once famous luxury resort that has long since been forgotten about. Here, we get mixed up in a dastardly scheme run by this bizarre masked man with an obsession for an old Russian opera singer to basically have her come and perform for him and his clockwork audience, so he can kidnap her and keep her in a cage for the remainder of her senior years. You know, maybe this is a horror game after all. This is a little off topic, but the way Kate Walker gets roped into this is that our fiendish genius steals Oscar's hands from him so that they can be attached to his automaton to play this elaborate organ. Yeah, creepy, right? Now, during our daring escape, we recover the hands simply by taking a screwdriver to the automaton. A screwdriver that we picked up shortly after entering the building in the first place. And the organ player is like, right there. But, you know, his sleeves aren't rolled up, so I guess we gotta launch a guy into space and ride a zeppelin to Arlbad to subject a very senior and fragile lady to a traumatic experience. Well, at least she got to sing one last time. I just want to say that the fact that I just wrote that sentence is exactly why I love these games. It's absurd, and somehow it works. So when the final bombs go off and the train speeds off to its destination, when Kate Walker's boss is telling her what a failure she is and how he was wrong to trust her, at that moment, we finally meet Hans Voralberg.
Mr. Voralberg? Hans Voralberg?
You've brought the train then. That's good.
While Hans is certainly in his senior years, he still talks much like a child. Things are very simple to him. He made the train, he made Oscar, and now he's going to the island of Syberia to finally see mammoths. Oddly though, at that moment he asks Kate Walker if she's coming with him.
Kate Walker?
Yes, Mr. Voralberg?
Are you coming on the train too, Kate Walker?
And I think it's here that the last thread holding her back to her old life snaps in her. While it takes a little time to truly sink in, she comes to understand just how much this journey has changed her, and, as we'll talk about later, how much the life she left behind isn't even there for her to go back to now. Even as she tells him she can't go, you can hear the yearning in her voice to continue. Why go back to New York? Why be a lawyer? Why not throw it all away in a single act of madness or passion and run off on a wondrous clockwork train piloted by a seemingly sentient automaton and help a strange old man fulfill an impossible dream of finding a legendary island that isn't listed on any map where the last remnants of an extinct species are supposed to be. Oh, do you even have to ask? Syberia 2 picks up a matter of days after the first game finishes. Kate Walker, Hans and Oscar are all aboard the wondrous clockwork train that is speeding across northern Syberia, a land that is getting colder and colder. While it may have been easy for her to cut loose from her life in New York, that life is looking to come and get her. Her employers are trying to get her back, and they're now in the process of hiring a private detective to hunt her down. I'm going to give Marsden the benefit of the doubt here. He may have Kate's mother breathing down his neck, and he might also be interested in knowing about his contract. But the fact is, from his perspective, he sent a promising young woman to Europe to take care of a simple contract signing, and somehow she wound up jumping around over half of Eastern Europe looking for some guy who's supposed to be dead, saying some pretty wild stuff, breaking up with her boyfriend and best friend, before simply telling her boss she was never coming back. While she was in Russia. So as the Voralberg Express pulls into the station at Romansburg, her old firm hires detective Nick Canton to head out there and find her. What an awesome name. I bet he looks so cool. Never mind. As per usual, now that we've stopped, we've got to wind the train's spring. Great. I wonder what absurdities will stop us from achieving that this time. Well, damn, that was easy. Okay, Oscar, let's go, bro.
That's impossible, Kate Walker.
Why, Oscar?
Soon we shall be confronting extremely cold temperatures, Kate Walker. We shall need coal to keep ourselves warm.
This time you're not wrong, Oscar. It is a bit nippy.
As soon as you have filled the coal car, we can set out again, Kate Walker.
I'll see what I can do.
Well, that's a new one at least. Romansburg is the last bastion of civilization this far north. Beyond here it's nothing but snow and wild animals, until we finally reach the Ukol tribe. And remember, this is a part of the world that can get down below minus 25 degrees Celsius. No, I won't use inferior, nonsensical American measurements. So this is something of an important last stop for the train. We are also establishing a few important points here. First is that Hans's health is failing, and one way or another, this is his last trip. We are also flexing our slightly more powerful game engine that can now create a world that at least feels somewhat lived in, and introducing the villains of this particular piece. These two, you know what, I've been playing a lot of Planescape recently, so I'll call them Burks. These two Burks, named Ivan and Igor Burgov. I'll talk a little more about these guys later. Similar to Sergei in the first game, they're somewhat over-the-top caricature type villains, but where Sergei was almost pitiful, Ivan is someone I absolutely despise, which is on account of some good writing and characterization. They first cause problems for us when we need some gasoline for a generator, and they're the only guys with any available. Remember, this is the kind of place that is so remote that when things are out of stock, it could be weeks or even months before they're restocked. And, okay you say, it's their gasoline, surely it's up to them what they do with it. And yeah, but this is a small, far-flung community. People tend to help each other out, if only because doing so will mean they won't be left out in the cold themselves if things take a turn for the worse. When talking to Ivan the first time, he doesn't even give a reason why he doesn't want to share. He acts lecherous first, and then tells Kate to shove off without even being willing to negotiate. It's that kind of spiteful behaviour that punctuates all his actions, and is ultimately how this guy got under my skin. So once we have the train stocked with coal and are ready to pull out, Hans has something of a seizure and is taken to his bed. And this isn't a place that's overflowing with stocks of medicine, and the closest thing to a doctor they have are some monks with some very odd customs. Still, Kate is able to navigate this strange order's rituals, and thanks to some Yukol herbal medicine, is able to bring Hans back to consciousness. They have a dramatic escape from the monastery, and just when it seems all is well and we can finally get on our merry way, real disaster strikes. While Kate Walker is fixing a Clockwork Horse attraction on Hans's behalf, Ivan and Igor move in and swipe the train, taking Hans and Oscar with them and charging off into the north, leaving Kate behind to figure out how she's going to catch up to them. A problem she manages to solve with all the style we've come to expect from her. So, our major stakes for this part of the adventure are now established. We are now involved in a kind of race to catch up with the train, Oscar and Hans, and liberate them from their captors, thwart whatever their intentions are, and finally get this train to the Yukol village so we can take the trip to the island of Syberia. While Kate Walker is our heroine and point of view character, she's not the only person involved in this adventure. Our best bro on this wild journey is Oscar. Now, ignoring the absurdity of a clockwork automaton that has a more sophisticated personality than modern day large language models, Oscar is just great.
Oscar, see you later, alligator.
In a while, Kate Walker.
He's taking up the comic relief role here for sure, but he's not some jester who's just around to be the butt of every joke. In fact, Oscar displays far more empathy towards Kate Walker than either Dan or Olivia do, and is surprisingly sweet at times. When we first meet him in Valladolid, we have to wrestle with his strict adherence to the rules of his programming, though this seems somewhat performative. Either Oscar began developing his personality very early on, or he was programmed with a fair amount of flexibility in mind. He has absolutely no reason to help Kate Walker at all, and yet he stumbles upon these seeming loopholes in his programming that allow him to point out how she might go about taking the train herself in Anna's place.
One ticket. What is your final destination?
I don't know. It's you who told me I had to get a ticket.
A ticket to travel, then.
He still refuses to leave until we've acquired several important items, though. I guess I could write it off as his directives to get the train to Aralbad overruling his other directives, but I also like to think he may be in the early stages of developing something akin to a soul. There's a wonderful opportunity here for me to segue into speculating on the nature of consciousness, and how we might never be able to tell if an AI is truly conscious or simply imitating it perfectly. But I'm gonna stay on track with this one. While Oscar always has some excuse or another to not actually get off the train and help Kate Walker actually solve some of the problems she's up against,
I am obliged to avoid exposing my wheelwork to corrosive bird excreta.
And he's not even close to being the Terminator.
Why, it is absolutely inadmissible, intolerable, and indescribable. I have been attacked.
We do start to develop something like a connection or even a bond with our wondrous mechanical man. His personality quirks become features rather than bugs. In fact, as he says himself about automatons,
automatons do not have bugs, Kate Walker. They simply display functional idiosyncrasies.
But he's also just a friendly ear to listen to our heroine's concerns. At the start of Syberia 2, in our first conversations with him, he refuses to get into topics of Hans's health and the likelihood of success of their mission. And again, this could just be his programming, but it sounds an awful lot like he's trying to deflect this conversation from topics he finds difficult and emotional to deal with. Whether or not he's just imitating human behaviour, Oscar comes across as a far better human being than Kate's boyfriend. Suffice to say, I like this guy. And I don't like him in spite of his eccentricities. I like him because of them. I always enjoyed asking him to help, just to hear what wonderful excuse he'd come up with this time. While Oscar is a great bro though, the real reason for this section is to talk about the villains of the piece. There are many ways to write a villain, and how you go about it rather depends on what you want to achieve. Not every villain needs to be a hateful creature on the level of, say, Suguru Kamoshida or Lucas Baker, though one guy in these games did get under my skin in the same way these guys did. Sergei Borodin is the first antagonist we come across later in the first game. The man is a walking collection of red flags, and something of an over-the-top comic book villain. It's entirely possible he's aware of this fact too, given how much he leans into the role. I mean, listen to that laugh. We encounter him shortly after winding the train at Komkolsgrad mine, after he steals Oscar's hands. He explains that he worked here back when the mine was operational, and was basically left to steward the place after it was shut down, and it seems he, just like the mine and the space station connected to it, have been truly forgotten about. I mean, I guess someone is signing off on those paychecks, and making sure food and alcohol shows up at the place periodically, but maybe it's all just been lost in the system somewhere. Sergei has used his isolation to fixate on a specific moment in his life, when the great opera singer Helena Romansky performed at the mine, and has used his free time and resources to transform the place into a grand organ that can be played by automaton, so that Helena can return and give another amazing performance. He's absolutely convinced that if he builds this thing, she'll come because... Because. In fact, he offloads Helena's arrival onto Kate Walker, which leads to her exploring Sergei's personal shrine to this singer. If the cartoonish mask he wears, or the fact that he dedicated his time to the construction of this elaborate organ wasn't setting off alarm bells, well, surely this place would? This basically jumpstarts the final chapter of the first game, which sees Kate flying to Aralbad on this incredible clockwork zeppelin to try to convince Helena to come to Komkolsgrad to perform, where this happens. Damn, if only there'd been some kind of red flags warning us that this guy was a total psychopath. In Syberia 2, our first rather amusing antagonist is the patriarch of the monastery in Romansburg. When Hans becomes dangerously ill, the closest thing in the area to a doctor is this man. But he's a man of a lot more faith than he is charity. We hear from this little girl Malka that when her mother was very sick, he wouldn't even try to help her, because in his words, her illness wasn't serious enough for their attention and she should just accept God's plan. I bet it never occurred to him once that if God's plan is a thing, then it was God's plan that brought the sick to his doorstep so he could heal them. But whatever. There are hoops to jump through just to get the patriarch to even look at Hans, and when he is finally brought to the monastery, it's basically to oversee his passing. I don't want to get too sidetracked here, but we're all clear that this is what Mother Teresa's real deal was at this point, right? Like, she wasn't helping the sick get better at all. There were no doctors in any of her... Anyway, let's let's just get back to the story. With the help of some shamanic mumbo-jumbo, Kate is able to rouse Hans and break his fever, and the pair of them have a dramatic escape in a coffin sled ride down the side of a mountain, while this guy screams, "Stop him! He's supposed to die!"
Stop him! He's supposed to die!
And shakes his fist like Dick Dastardly. Ivan and Igor though, well, that's another issue entirely. Igor I can take or leave. Like Hans, he's also intellectually stunted, but unlike Hans, he doesn't seem to have any great talents beyond his physical size, and a lifetime of being guided around by his wretched goblin of a brother has given him a somewhat skewed sense of morality. It's Ivan that I absolutely despise though. I've already introduced him as a spiteful and petty little wretch, but it's later in the game that he really got under my skin. This pair steal the train, Oscar and Hans, and ride off into the north for ivory. That's it. They just want a payday. Ivan is in many ways the antithesis of Hans and Kate. Hans is trying to fulfill some kind of long-held childhood dream. He's constructed so many wonderful things that have brought joy and wonder to so many people. Seriously, wait until we talk about the world before. Kate is helping Hans because of a sense of adventure and genuine empathy and compassion for this odd little man and his seemingly impossible quest. They are rushing to the edge of the world to explore the ultimate mystery of what if? What if somehow, someway, the stories were actually true? And given I consider the journey equal to, if not greater than the destination, I can't think of any truer way to live one's life. Ivan though, he's just a selfish wretch looking to get rich, and he doesn't care who he hurts or what he destroys along the way. When we catch up to the train after seeing the thugs ride off on a snowbike with a sick senior citizen restrained to it, we find the place wrecked. I recall feeling a real sense of violation here. This once adorable little bastion of warmth and comfort in the endless snow and cold has been broken and ruined in the name of greed and spite. Oscar is pushed from his train and left to freeze in the snow by someone who couldn't care less for anything that isn't going to make him a penny richer. And finally, I have to condemn my little home cart to the void for the sake of their hubris and greed. But that wasn't even the worst of it. No, the worst was this line here.
Ha ha, Kate Walker! The ivory's ours.
The man cannot conceive of any other reason people would be travelling into the north save for ivory and wealth. He thinks Kate is like him, which frankly gave me massive ick. I think that's what the kids say these days. Yeah, I'm cool. Based. That's like another word, right? Ivan goes on to abandon his brother and even to try to kill Kate before apparently falling to his death. He makes another appearance right towards the end on the Ucal arc that's heading to the island of Syberia. And at that point, I was just so done with this guy. I understand awful people constantly being able to dodge the consequences of their actions in the real world. It's not that hard if you've got enough money. But in stories, the villains are supposed to get their comeuppance, and I was so far past dealing with this guy's shit. Still, his karma does catch up to him quite dramatically in the end. I wonder if there are any recorded accounts of death by penguin. Okay, we're back. I definitely didn't just spend the last hour looking at pictures of penguins. So, let's talk about the setting. Syberia often feels like a walking tour of this strange, forgotten part of the world where everything is old and trapped in a memory of a time long ago when it mattered to someone. Think of all those seaside resorts that once upon a time played host to thousands of tourists every year and slowly became obsolete when commercial airline travel became affordable to the working class. Those places whose day has long passed, but somehow they didn't get the memo about it, and the people working there just keep on chugging along like nothing has changed, and occasionally wondering why everything is kinda outdated, dusty, and in need of repair. That's the world we're exploring now. From the very beginning in the sleepy town of Valladolid all the way to Arelbad, these seem less like real places and more like the memory or even dream of a much greater place that once was. One that is slowly disintegrating and preparing to be paved over and forgotten about. Now, there's no doubt that the game's budget and limitations of the engine played into this. There's no way in hell that a mid-budget game that came out in the early 2000s was going to be pulling off anything like, say, Shenmue in terms of displaying a living world.
Saijo-san, do you know any places where sailors like to hang out around here?
However, whether by design or as a way to use the game's limitations to their advantage, having only a few characters in these environments, even at the university lecture, helped to create this bizarre and... I learnt a new word when I was watching interviews about this series, so I'm going to use it here. Oniric world. So let's talk pre-rendered backgrounds for a moment. If you know me, you know I love these, and I like to harp on about how awesome they are, were, and still can be every chance I get. Most of you will probably know them from classic Resident Evil, or, if you're especially cool, even earlier games like Alone in the Dark or Bioforge. Essentially, to cut down on the processing power needed to show detailed backgrounds, environments are modeled, textured, and rendered in a separate program on a very powerful PC to create what was probably some of the best a certain era could produce. Well, kinda anyway. Remember that these images need to be relatively small and compressed in such a way that it can all fit onto a CD-ROM and be rendered quickly by the hardware of the era. In the game engine, only simple collision geometry and character models exist, and a special texture called a depth pass, or a Z-pass, is used to tell the machine if the character model is supposed to be in front of or behind something, though failing that, a simple textured 2D plane can act as a kind of mask for this kind of stuff too. One more touch to add extra life to these environments is to have low-res pre-rendered video playing over the image to create the likes of these birds flying around. The main drawback to these kinds of backgrounds is that they can appear kind of dead, and the character models can seem to be separate from them. Which they are, of course, but still. Resident Evil Remake really managed to nail it through its art direction and use of dynamic lighting and shadows to really set the characters into the backgrounds. But Syberia isn't quite on that level. I'm not for a second implying it's immersion breaking or even bad, but there is this sense that I'm exploring a photo of a place that was taken a long time ago versus actually exploring that place. And that works. I would love to tell you this was clearly all intentional. Well, I guess in the flashback scene we have towards the end of Syberia 2, it certainly is intentional, and the old sepia filter gives us the impression of walking through some very old photo album. But for the rest of the game, it could just as easily have been a happy accident. As I said, the world we're exploring is old. Almost everything that is metal, even the magnificent train, which we know was only recently put together, has rust. Everywhere also feels abandoned and forgotten about. In Val-de-Laine we discover everything is closed because of the funeral, but I can't imagine this place is any more bustling on a Saturday afternoon. Barakstadt, on the other hand, feels completely sterile almost, and eerily quiet for a place that is supposed to be filled with young minds that are eager to learn and carry that knowledge into the future, where they'll hopefully expand on it and pass it along to the next generation. I almost feel like Kate Walker should be whispering through these conversations that she has, lest she waken these mammoth skeletons. Komkolsgrad and Aralbad are places that were important during the old Soviet Union. Komkolsgrad was a mine that became automated by Hans's automatons, and also had a branch of the Russian space program attached to it. That is, until Hans up and ran off to continue his own adventures, and the government shut down the whole thing. Aralbad is literally that washed up resort I was talking about earlier. It's a place that in its heyday played host to the most important people in the old Soviet Union, and going there was considered a great privilege. People could arrive by train or magnificent clockwork airship. But the resort is something forgotten now. Its beach is littered with the corpses of fishing boats. There are almost no guests there, and only a single staff member who can apparently spend most of his time watching football operates the whole thing. Even the old furniture and cocktail mixer seem to be lamenting the loss of the grandeur and prestige this place once had. In Aralbad we meet Helena Romansky, a one-time opera singer of great fame. Just like the resort though, Helena's days of being young, important and adored by thousands are long past her. She is now just a sweet old lady who feels like she has lost something precious to her. And while she is well cared for by her own version of Oscar, who's named James, who is just as picky about the air quality for his wheel work as our own engineer, she is simply waiting to die. She doesn't seem entirely lonely or depressed, and she's living out the last of her life in a place she has fond memories of. But until Kate Walker comes along, there is a very strong sense that this woman has decided it's time to give up. The young vibrant opera star may be no more, but at least she has her memories. Syberia 2 has a similar but somewhat different vibe. Romansburg isn't exactly a forgotten place. In fact, this place seems to be far more alive than anywhere else we've visited so far. We can see people working outside, and there's even a friendly tavern, just what every adventurer needs to pick up quests and side gigs. But I think with Syberia 2, there is much more of a sense of isolation. Kate Walker, Hans and Oscar are now really far from civilization. Romansburg is the last stop on the track until they reach their final destination. I think the pre-rendered backgrounds and character models are much better in this game. There are little touches like the falling snow that help a lot to set Kate Walker and the other characters into the scene. No doubt some work was done on the engine in between games, and PC technology has always moved pretty fast, meaning developers can afford to push the envelope a little harder in terms of minimum requirements in the space of a couple of years. In terms of location though, the standout here is absolutely the Yukol village. It's explained at various points throughout both games that the Yukols had a very symbiotic relationship with their mammoth herds. Mammoth bone, ivory and skin were their major building materials, and were used for their homes, clothes and tools. The reason the Yukols settled in northern Syberia was to harvest the carcasses of the many dead mammoths preserved in the ice, and they were, at least for a while, receiving steady supplies from the Ark, which would return unmanned with tusks and hides for the tribe. This isolation meant that their way of life basically hasn't changed for tens of thousands of years. More or less anyway. My guess is this water wheel contraption is a Hans Voralberg special, and they've also constructed an extension to the train track as well to allow the clockwork train to be pulled all the way into their cavern beneath the ice. The whole place is dripping with the oniric, not quite real feeling that has punctuated so much of the game. It's fantasy for sure, but feels just real enough to leave you asking, what if? We live in a world that is surrounded by satellites, where air travel allows us to take off and land anywhere in the world in under a day. Take that, Mr. Fogg. Still love this story. And though it may seem that our world has no more mysteries, at least mysteries of this nature to give up, stories and worlds like this lead one to stare down a random side trail on a hike and ask yourself, I wonder where it leads. I've covered a few point-and-click adventures before, and honestly, I wonder just how much there really is left to say about them. It's not that Syberia is exactly the same as, say, The Longest Journey or Grim Fandango, but it's not wildly different from those games on a mechanical level either. I suppose the quality of the puzzles is really what makes or breaks these games. Are they intuitive, or do they require an absurd amount of pixel hunting and trial and error to get through? Do you feel like you're unraveling the mystery of the areas you're in and overcoming barriers to progress through the story, or are you just beating your head against a brick wall until something gives? And when you do get stumped for a long time or finally find yourself reaching for a guide, do you feel like it was your fault all along and you've learned how to play the game better? Or is it just some bullshit the devs did to artificially inflate what should have been a simple challenge for you to overcome? And in Syberia's case, the answer is yes. This part of the review is probably going to get a little into the negative, as for all its charm and the wonderful story it crafts, Syberia's puzzles definitely have some of the problems that eventually led to the decline of these old school narrative adventure games. None of these puzzles are outright batshit insane moon logic, but they definitely veer more into the realm of frustration. Narrative adventure games live and die on two things: inventory and sometimes environmental puzzles, and dialogue trees. Inventory puzzles are the type where you have to bring a key in your inventory to a lock so you can progress through it. This could be a literal key that you bring to a literal door or gate, like those found in Resident Evil, and yes, that game counts because survival horror is a tangent of the narrative adventure game. Or the lock could be skeleton pigeons guarding their eggs, and the key could be a balloon animal shaped like Robert Frost and a loaf of bread. And then of course there's this fucking abomination. A monstrosity that has done permanent damage to both myself and many another traveller in the land of Stark. And should there actually be a hell at the end of all this, I will make a point of being there to personally oversee the torment of everyone involved in its creation. I'm not overreacting, you are. The point is that under the hood, in the world of code, it all works the same. Bring item with tag A to obstruction with tag A, which will then play animation A and remove Collider A. Simples. Anyway, let's talk about talking. I have a lot of mixed feelings about dialogue trees, but I think Syberia actually has a good way of dealing with them that gets even better in the second game too. I don't really see the point of dividing up your conversations into topics when your player is just going to click through them all anyway. It seems like you're only creating the illusion of control. Still, I've read counterpoint comments in some of my other videos saying it's preferable to just watching an entire conversation in one sitting, similar to something like a Metal Gear codec call. And I can totally agree with that. Games are an interactive medium after all, and as much as I enjoy the performances of David Hayter and co, I also find myself looking at my watch and wondering when the hell they're going to wrap this up so I can get back to actually playing this game. Also, if you think about it, most of the control we have in a game, especially one like this, well, it's very limited anyway. We may on occasion be able to solve branching puzzles in a different sequence, but we always have to solve all of these puzzles in order to advance to the next part of the story, and we are on rails the entire time. I still wonder if there is a more elegant solution to this problem though. Whenever Kate Walker talks to someone, she has a list of topics to go through. These range from something as general as her self-introduction.
The name is Kate Walker. My name is Kate. Kate Walker. My name is Kate Walker. Kate Walker. My name is Kate Walker. Kate Walker.
Bond. James Bond.
To very specific things like asking about the local wildlife. You might find useful information in some of these, but usually the options for mission and help are going to yield the responses you need to progress the story. Where the second game has a leg up on the first is that topics actually vanish after they've been exhausted, meaning you won't be able to repeat dialogue, or when you are stuck on a puzzle, you'll know if a character has nothing of value to contribute to your predicament. In both games you may need to click on a topic more than once to get the actual speech that you need to continue the story, so this is a nice touch. Also, on occasion, topics will reappear in the notebook when talking to certain people, but that just indicates that they now have something new to say on the subject, and that it's probably useful for solving your problem. So this is a fairly elegant way of handling dialogue trees. I never felt like I was slogging through topics just on the off chance I missed something, so overall, there weren't any problems here. The puzzles on the other hand, well, that's where I have issues. Like, a lot of issues. The first thing I'll say is if you just want to enjoy the story, then I'll suggest up front you either just follow a guide or watch a let's play. Ideally one with no commentary so you can get the full force of the narrative. Myself, I went as hard as I was willing into cracking the puzzles on my own, and only resorted to checking a guide when I'd explored the play area multiple times, talked to every character about every topic, and done my damnedest to comb the screens for interactable locations and pickups. That last part right there should be a big clue as to what caused a lot of my problems when playing these games. Yep, the dreaded pixel hunting is here, and it was a huge reason for most of my headaches. Not only is it quite easy to miss triggers and colliders for interactable objects, but you can also miss out on scene transitions if you aren't carefully exploring all of the borders of the play area. I understand that this is something that was part of most classic point-and-click adventure games, but I think we can all agree it wasn't actually good. In most situations where I consulted a guide, I realized that I was on the right track and looking for the right thing, but had failed on what boiled down to a technicality. It's something that could easily have been fixed with a button to highlight selectable areas, like what most classic CRPGs have, or the Resident Evil method of using actual 3D models for interactables and pickups because of how much they stand out against the backgrounds. I'm not asking these games to go all out yellow paint, but something subtle like Manny Calavera's head swing, or a slight change in the hue or saturation of interactable items and locations would go a long way to solving this problem. Unfortunately though, pixel hunting seems much more like a feature than a bug in these games. I'm not entirely sure where to lay the blame here. On one hand, Syberia was made by a very small team, so it's not like they had an infinite supply of fresh playtesters to expose their puzzles to every time they updated their build. So who can really say how this looked from the developer point of view? But it sure does seem like they thought they were adding real challenge to this game by making transitions and items obscure and difficult to find. Let's head to the University of Barrikstad for our first example. There's one of Hans and Anna's music box cylinders here at the university, and Oscar isn't going to let you drive off over the Russian border without you getting it. The only thing is, you haven't had any reason to think one of these things is here at all. It's actually located in this cupboard here, which again you have no incentive to explore or even give a second glance at, unless you by chance happen to move your cursor over it and see the transition marker appear. Or how about we jump towards the end of the second game and take a look at this train control panel. So I can see levers and switches and things that are obvious to use, but this is where the key goes to switch it on. What even is this? To me, this is the equivalent of a game with a lot of traversal, having a section where you have to walk or balance on a narrow ledge, and rather than keeping the camera behind you where it would actually be useful, it swings to some weird angle and disables your ability to reset the camera to artificially inflate the difficulty. It's not adding challenge, just frustration, and it could even be considered time wasting. I could easily bring up a dozen examples from both games, but I think I've made my point clear. There is one very specific puzzle that needs to be addressed for different reasons. In the Romansberg Monastery, it's actually possible to softlock yourself out of progressing the game any further. You're supposed to open this panel here, place this lens into the hole, and then play with the flaps until... Wow, now I'm typing this out, it sounds really bad, doesn't it? So we're making the hole bigger and smaller. Go on, get all the laughs out. Basically though, if you start the second part without inserting the first part, the hole will shrink up and you'll never actually be able to get it completely open again, and it just keeps getting worse. This is something of a well-known bug in the game, but it's a fairly big derp on behalf of the team. The instruction manual only credits 3 people as testers though, so while I'm sure these guys knew their stuff when it came to tracking actual bugs, if none of them had messed up the first time they tried this puzzle, it's fair to say they might never have seen this one. So now we have to move on to something a little more complicated to tackle, that being motivation and direction. I think the simplest way I can describe this is, you want your players to have some kind of idea of what they are trying to do before they start trying to do it. For example, you want them to be going somewhere and to run into a locked door before they find a key. This way they understand that they need to find a key and can set about exploring with the intention of specifically doing that and have that eureka moment when they find it. Resident Evil 1 does this with great mastery, and its creepy mansion setting goes a long way towards helping with that. You'll come up against locked doors very early on, so even though you may not find the specific key needed for the door you ran into, you understand that there are locked doors and you should keep tabs on where you come across keys or move them to a storage box as quickly as you can. Likewise, heading left from the mansion entrance will have you stumble into puzzle locks here, but find interesting items for puzzle locks on the other side of the mansion, and vice versa. Meaning there is a good mix of finding a puzzle lock first, and then later stumbling into the key and getting that big dopamine kick as you rush to ferry it back to the puzzle, and also finding a lock and realizing you now know exactly what that random thing you saw in that room way over on the other side of the mansion, or that has been sitting in your chest for hours, is needed for now. The point is, you always know your goal, and you are always moving with intention towards it. In the opening scene in Syberia, we have an encounter between Kate, the hotel owner, and Momo. That ends with Momo storming out and dropping cogs all over the floor. We can pick these cogs up, and even take a look at this little carving of the shape they're supposed to go in, long before we have any reason to think we even have clockwork contraptions to fix. This is a very minor immersion break, and nothing super bad. After all, I've played these kinds of games before, so I can just say, hey, Kate is a nice girl who's just cleaning up, and maybe planning to return these to Momo later. But this becomes something of a bigger problem down the line. On one hand, I applaud that we're given so much freedom to explore the play areas in this game, but on the other, it can be very easy to break what feels like the intended order of encountering and solving puzzles, and just kind of feel like you're flying blind, and doing stuff because this is an adventure game and solving puzzles is how we get to the next section of the story. In Valladolid, it can be very easy to rush off and wind up going down the path that leads to finding the mammoth doll, long before you have any idea what the hell you're supposed to be doing with it. It's probably this puzzle with the train near the end of the second game that made this something I wanted to bring up though. In the Ukol village, we are given instructions to prepare the way for the trip to Syberia, but the only item we have to tackle this now is the key to the train. The train that is very much at the end of the line. So we're given a bunch of levers and dials to pull and twist without really knowing why we're doing any of it. The actual point is to use the train as a massive heat gun to melt the ice surrounding this ship, meaning you need to stock up on coal for fire and water for steam. This is probably one of those times when the pre-rendered backgrounds were actually to the game's detriment. I know, right? Someone take my pre-rendered background fan club card from me. But had I just been able to swing the camera and get some idea of the train's location relative to this big block of ice, or maybe being able to see more of this frozen ice and get a better idea of what it is and that there's something inside there, I feel like this would have all made a lot more sense and felt more intuitive. As it stood, I felt like I was just randomly pulling levers until something happened, and then when I got the cutscene I was like, oh, so that's what I was doing. And I feel like that isn't the desired response to a puzzle like this. Okay, I think that's enough negatives. I'm going to have you thinking I don't like this game at this rate. Think of me as that friend who's always complaining about his girlfriend. You might think our relationship is terrible and, well, in some cases you'd definitely be right. But in this case, it's just that when everything is great, I don't need to say anything more than, yeah, things are good. And I may not want to share the more intimate moments of my relationship with my friends like that. But when things are bad and I need to vent, my bros are the ones I go to. I think the thing I like most about Syberia's puzzles are the various books we can find around the world that help us along the way. Not least of all because we get some of Benoit Sokal's wonderful art in them, but because they reward paying careful attention to them. There are more obvious examples like the botany book in the Barokstadt University. Once you have this book, you can start asking for the grapes you need to attract the Amazon birds. However, if you take the time to read through Brother Alexei's notes from the frozen north at the start of the second game, you're going to get hints about these little lemming guys that will be used in a puzzle much later in the game, as well as learn about the Yukis and how they are eternally led by their stomachs. And hey, that sure does look like Oscar there, huh? What's that exactly? Ooh, the Soul Messenger. I bet the Yukils would think he's kinda scary if they saw him. I love stuff like this because it rewards your curiosity and makes you want to pay attention and look things over carefully. And there is just as much of that as there is the stuff I was complaining about earlier. So let's call it a 50-50 on the puzzles. I know that 5 out of 10 is considered a bad score these days, but think of it as, yes, there are problems, but there's also great stuff, and they kind of balance each other overall. Syberia 2's adventure is just as wild as the first game's, if a lot snowier. Chasing down the train, Kate Walker finds herself getting trapped in a hunting lodge by a bear, swinging across a precipice like she's Indiana Jones, and... you know what, I'm calling bullshit on this one. Maybe if I could see the rock face in actual 3D, I might be convinced it's a very low level climb, but the level of skill needed for something like that isn't something you can just pull out of your inside jacket pocket. We also get a brief reunion with our aspiring space pilot from the first game, and see that the mission we sent him away on back then, well, I mean, it mostly succeeded, just not so much the landing part. And if Yuki-powered train cars, deadly rope swings, and death-defying wall climbs still aren't James Bond enough for you, how's this? I love this game. It is completely bonkers. Syberia 2, however, doesn't pull any punches at the end. The wacky adventures of Hans, Kate, and Oscar get very real very quickly when we finally arrive at the Yukol village. Hans' ordeal with Igor and Ivan leaves him almost at death's door, and even the Yukol shaman is ready to simply ease his passage into the next life. So Kate Walker must enter into a dream trance and try to coax him back into consciousness, so he can finish his final voyage. It's here we get a peek into the young boy's unfortunate upbringing. We know from Anna's diary that Hans was locked in the attic of his house for extended periods of time, even missing his own 18th birthday because his father wanted him to abandon his interest in mammoths and focus his talents on things that would help the company. We also have to solve one of the game's most infuriating puzzles in the form of this grandfather clock, which, as far as I can tell, presumes we all have pre-existing knowledge of how these things work. Don't feel bad about checking a guide to solve this one. It's needlessly complex and unintuitive. You're basically going to have to do a bunch of trial and error to figure it out, And the last time I checked, that was one of the things we wanted to avoid in these kinds of games. Anyway, we find young Hans in his attic working on something that will help him one day. A truly ingenious automaton heart called Oscar. And he tells us that opening Oscar's heart will bring him back. And when I approached Oscar about this, oh god, my heart broke when he said this.
Kate Walker, I am really very pleased to have met you.
Oscar's ultimate purpose, or at least the purpose of the body he's encased in, is actually a kind of mobility suit or exoskeleton to keep our boy Hans moving just a little longer. And with that gut-wrenching scene out of the way, all our tears dried up, a heavy drinking session, a hangover the next day, and finally getting back to the game, we used the train to thaw the Uccle arc, which carries us to our final destination. We have only a couple more puzzles to crack before we finish the game, but everything we need should be at our fingertips now. Though again, there's still some pixel hunting involved, and I can't imagine anyone at this stage is really in the mood for having the narrative grind to a screeching halt because of that. But whatever, I've done enough complaining about pixel hunting already. But on the impossible island of blue grass, somewhere beyond the snow and ice of the Arctic Ring, we sound an ancient Uccle horn, and we wait as the rain begins to pour down. And just when it seems like this was truly a fool's errand, Syberia 1 and 2 were both critical and commercial successes. In the modern AAA landscape where games are expected to sell multiple millions of copies in their first few months, sales in the hundreds of thousands, spread out over a few years, might not seem like a big deal at all. But these were games made by small teams with small budgets, and I doubt they were as heavily marketed as your average Ubislog or Electronic Atrocity. The games found their audience, and they made their money. More importantly though, Syberia became something of a cult classic. A niche game for a niche audience that punched way above its weight class. People loved the story and the characters, and have wonderful memories of playing. Memories I'm hoping a few of you will share in the comments with me down below. It stands shoulder to shoulder with the likes of Tim Schafer's classic LucasArts games. As I said at the start of the video, there's no doubt that Benoit Sokal's artistic vision is the biggest reason for this. He painted a beautiful world, and took us on a whimsical dreamlike adventure through it, broke our hearts along the way, and at the very end we watched Hans Voralberg finally achieve his childhood dream and take his last ride on the back of a mammoth. And Kate Walker, well, just like Dr. Sam Beckett. There are certain genres that I can just name and you will instantly know if it's not for you. Point and click adventure is definitely one of them. Modern narrative adventure games, those that are influenced by the likes of Life is Strange and the David Cage-like, I think have broader appeal, and it will be more of the contents of the game that will be the deal breaker. So if point and click adventures is a massive turn off for you, well, this probably isn't going to be the series that changes your mind. If you are just interested in the story though, you could play through the games with a guide as I've suggested before. But there's also the Syberia comic that tells a slightly different version of the story, more from the perspective of Hans from what I understand. For everyone else though, I guess if you are a point and click adventure fan, then you've already played this. You already know how amazing it is, and you don't need me to tell you that. But if like me this one did pass you by and has been sitting on your to play list for a long time, don't wait any longer. Seriously, Install this game, jump on a wondrous clockwork train, and go take the adventure of a lifetime. Time passed. The story was finished. Benoit Sokal directed Paradise and The Sinking Island. Both games seem to have lackluster receptions, but I'm down to give them a try sometime. Maybe not for the channel, but for myself for sure. But it seemed for the longest time like The Legend of Kate Walker and the wonderful world that had begun with Amazon was finished for good. But that wasn't actually the case. It would seem Benoit had always intended on revisiting these wonderful places and these characters, but he was just waiting for technology to finally catch up with his vision. So I have played Syberia 3, and overall, I didn't enjoy it. The world still has Benoit's trademark dreamlike feel to it, and I like the environments, and I may even be convinced that the full 3D backgrounds look better than pre-rendered backgrounds this time. But I have a lot, and I mean a lot of complaints, and I promised myself I'd never write a hit piece for this channel. I don't want to cultivate an audience looking to hate things because I don't want to subject my mind to constant negativity. I've seen people I respect become corrupted by that move, from simply creating things they want that sometimes require them to complain, to proactively looking for things to complain about so they can give the audience what they want. Also, I think we all know this, but game design is hard. While games like Forspoken or Concord were total flops, and there are people who worked on them who are absolutely responsible for that, that doesn't mean there weren't a lot of artists and coders working on those projects who were giving it everything they could under the circumstances. And many of those same people are probably out of a job now because of how the industry works. So I don't want to shit on their work just because the final product was a mess. So the next video will primarily focus on the much better Syberia The World Before. It was actually while I was playing the first game that I finally took a look at the trailer for The World Before and got very excited about it. And while I'm only a few hours in at the time of writing, I am really enjoying myself. I'm not going to overlook 3. We have to talk a little about its story, and there are a few things it did pretty well. So I'll spend a short time focusing on those things, then call it quits. So while we no longer have our luxurious clockwork train to bear us across Eastern Europe, we are far from done with our adventures with Kate Walker, the Sokols, and the amazing clockwork creations of Hans Voralberg. Well, hello there, and welcome to the end of the video. If you're new here, then I do these little sign-offs just as a way to say thank you to everyone who watches to the end, and also to do the occasional life update. This time I also just wanted to goof around with this avatar I've made. I've been doing 3D art and game mods for a very long time, and this is just a little something I put together as another tool in my toolbox for making my content more interesting. Not sure how I'm going to use it yet. Whether it'll make sporadic appearances in videos, or maybe I'll do the occasional stream. There's still a few bugs, and because I can't really speak off the cuff, well, I had to pre-record the audio too. Still, it's kind of fun. So we just got done with Sakura season over here, and now we're into the hotter, drier season that we get before the rainy season, after which summer will be here in full force, and it'll be hot and humid as hell. So that'll be fun. Time sure is moving fast though, huh? I'm back in regular work from the 1st of May, and the new school I'm working at seems nice, so I'm optimistic about the year. Anyway, I hope you're all doing well. Hug your mothers, tell your friends you love them, and don't let fear hold you back from something that could be wonderful. Peace out, my friends. Until next time.